From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capitol Connection.
Welcome to Capitol Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell reporting from the Illinois State House on this Sunday, June 28. With our state legislature sidelined during summer break, it was our elected officials on Capitol Hill in our nation's capital that picked up the baton as they continue to wrestle and grapple over ways to deliver relief during this era of the coronavirus, but also trying to find ways to enhance police accountability after the death of George Floyd in Minnesota. Now, a showdown in the U.S. Senate as they pick up the bill passed out of the House. All of Illinois' members of Congress voted along party lines in a vote on Thursday night to pass the Justice in Policing Act.
This is about police accountability. This is about modernizing what policing in the 21st century should be like. I think it responds to most of the demands of protesters across the country, which are representative of America's diversity and a recognition of the urgency to modernize essential laws that have to do with assuring that there is no more police profiling, that antiquated methods of policing are ended, and that everyone will feel protected by police bodies across the country.
Congressman Darin LaHood joins us now from his offices on Capitol Hill. Congressman, good to see you. A lot of Democrats said, and Republicans agreed, that some of the language in both different plans, the Democratic version and the Republican version, say a lot of the same things, but Democrats require police to do things when Republicans sort of recommend they do it. There's a difference. It seems Republicans are taking a softer stance on forcing police accountability and just recommending more reporting. Is that a fair assessment? And why the reluctance to get tougher with bad cops?
Couple things on that, Mark. I spent 10 years as a state and federal prosecutor, much of that in the state of Illinois. The vast majority of police officers and sheriff's deputies and state troopers and federal law enforcement that I've worked with are quality people in it for the right reasons. But let's remember a couple things. In the state of Illinois, we've already banned chokeholds. In the state of Illinois, we've already set up a database that tracks bad police officers. Many of these issues ought to be decided on the local level, and we've done that in the state of Illinois. That's one approach I would take. But I will say this, it is a poison pill, and the Democrats have included this in their bill, and they're well aware of this. To get rid of qualified immunity for police officers doesn't make any sense. You're not going to have anybody wanting to go into law enforcement if you grant qualified immunity. In Illinois already, if you want to sue the city of Springfield or the city of Springfield Police Department, you can do that. There's a civil remedy there. Nobody is going to go into law enforcement if you get rid of qualified immunity. So that's the biggest mistake the Democrats have made in doing it. It'd be like telling prosecutors you don't have qualified immunity to go into court or you're going to get sued every case that you prosecute. We can't do that.
I mean, how do we know that that's true? And perhaps this is apples and oranges, but I mean, we don't have a shortage of doctors necessarily lining up to go into the medical field. They could face malpractice lawsuits. What's the difference?
The difference is police are out every single day looking out for the safety of our communities. By the way, Mark, I talked yesterday and today to the 9 police chiefs in the largest cities in my district. Not one of them thinks getting rid of qualified immunity makes sense. And the police unions don't think that either, and the sheriff's deputies don't. So I can just tell you, in downstate Illinois, they will tell you to a person, they're not going to have anybody go into law enforcement if a police officer that does a traffic stop is going to get sued civilly the next week and have his personal property, whether it's his house or other things, in jeopardy. There's plenty of remedies to do that. That's the first thing. Second thing, the Democrats' insistence on getting rid of no-knock warrants doesn't make any sense. Right now in the state of Illinois, we have a judicial oversight process. When you go get a warrant, and I've done this plenty of times as a prosecutor, you give the facts and evidence to a judge. The judge reviews that, makes a decision whether there should be a no-knock. So we have plenty of provisions in place to protect that. We don't need to get rid of that at the federal level, and that's what this bill does. Take those two things out. There is 70% of this bill we can agree on. We ought to put in place new standards. We ought to have a national database on police officers. We ought to get rid of chokeholds on the federal level. But the Democrats, unfortunately, want to make a political issue out of this instead of getting good policy in place.
This is also an election year. A lot of eyes are watching toward November. We just saw some interesting news developing this week. Ted Cruz's former pick to be VP, should he have won the nomination in 2016, Carly Fiorina, you might remember her name. She said she's voting for Joe Biden. Your father has also said he's supporting Joe Biden's campaign for presidency. What kind of a president do you think Joe Biden would make?
Well, listen, I'm supporting President Trump. I'm proud to be his co-chair for Illinois. I look at the results that President Trump has put in place across this country. We had the best economy in my lifetime pre-COVID. What he's done with the federal judiciary, what he's done with trade agreements, whether it's USMCA or the Phase 1 deal with China or the trade agreement with Japan, rebuilding our military, standing up for the rule of law. President Trump has real results, and I know he's going to talk about that, and we are between now and the election. And that's what elections are all about, talking about ideas and a track record. And I think the President Trump is best equipped to get us back on track and rebuild this economy and get us through COVID.
But I didn't hear an answer to the question, which was what kind of a president do you think Joe Biden would be? Do you think he would be a capable, respectable executive of the United States?
Well, I look back over 40 years of Joe Biden being in Washington, D.C., and I look at what are his accomplishments? What has he done? And I put that up against President Trump and what he's done in 3.5 years. And it's remarkable in terms of those things that I just mentioned on the economy, on rebuilding our military, what he's done with our federal judiciary, on trade agreements. Those are real results, standing up for the rule of law. Those are things, and I would put that track record up against Joe Biden. But listen, we've come through a pandemic that we're still in now, we're coming out of. We've had unrest in the country. And so, these will be the issues that people will be focused on when they go into the voting booth. But I'm confident when they look at both sides, they'll see the track record and the results that President Trump has brought.
All right, Congressman Darin LaHood joining us for a wide-ranging conversation. Still a lot of time between now and November. We'll be watching closely to see what Congress can deliver on between now and then, and how the politics, the winds of the public opinion might shift in response to that. Congressman LaHood, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
We're back in a moment with Democratic Congresswoman and Chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Cheri Bustos. Stick around.
Mike here with Matex Heating, Cooling, and Plumbing. Purchase your new Train system this spring and get 0% APR financing or up to $1,000 in instant rebates. Visit MatexService.com for details. Get the fix with Matex.
Hello, I'm Craig McDonald with the McDonald Real Estate Company. Since 2010, we've been Champaign-Urbana's #1 team. And I'd like to introduce you to my Flex Plan listing, offering flexible commissions, the right to sell it yourself, and if you're not happy with my performance, fire me at any time. Let my clients speak.
2 homes sold in less than 6 days. Sold before it hit the market.
Sold in 1 day.
I'm not bragging, I'm applying for a job, and I want to be your realtor. Give me a call today at 217-359-7971, and thank you.
Here's to the road ahead. Trust Toyota to be here for you.
Now every hybrid vehicle in Toyota's lineup is available with 0% financing. With fewer stops for gas, Toyota hybrids give you the confidence to go farther. And with 0% financing, Toyota hybrids are even more thrilling. Enjoy more freedom in a Toyota hybrid. See your Toyota dealer or shop and buy online.
All from the brand you trust, today and tomorrow. Toyota.
Now that businesses are reopening, Central Illinois knows who to call to get their lives back in order. They call Menold. Consider Menold sanitizing and disinfection service and see if it's the right choice for you. We've been your trusted partner in the community for over 40 years.
Hi, my name is Angela Russell. I'm the marketing director at Carriage Crossing Senior Living. Our #1 priority is the health and the well-being of our residents. So we're doing virtual tours to let you see what our community has to offer from the comfort of your own home. I'll take you around the community and I will personalize a tour for you on my phone. You can either use Skype, Zoom, or FaceTime, and I'll answer any questions that you might have. Let us show you what Carriage Crossing is all about.
Secretary of State facilities are now open, but until July 31st, only new drivers and those with expired licenses and IDs will be served. Vehicle stickers can also be renewed. There's no need to rush in. All expiration dates have been extended, and the Real ID deadline is now October 2021. Safety measures, including social distancing, are in place, so please be patient. Avoid lines by renewing online or by phone. For more information, visit cyberdriveillinois.com.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
This week, the House and Senate debating how hard Congress should crack down on police following the death of George Floyd. Some of those controversial topics up for debate. Should officers have to knock when executing a warrant? Or should officers ever be allowed to use a chokehold even when they themselves fear for their lives? Or should the law provide a shield of qualified immunity that protects police officers from damages in court should they violate someone's civil or constitutional rights? And of course, can any of these changes calm the civil unrest and racial tension simmering beneath it all? One of the members of Congress who helps to write those laws goes home to an officer who enforces them. Her husband, the sheriff in Rock Island County, Congresswoman Cheri Bustos, joining us now. Congresswoman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
I wonder, the way I read these two plans, there's the Justice in Policing Act, there's the Justice Act, there's sort of the Democrat plan and the Republican plan. It seems that Democrats would require police to make changes where Republicans would recommend them, and Republicans would also ask the police to report more about their behavior to the public. Why is the Justice in Policing Act, what is it about that act or what is it about the Republican plan that you feel doesn't go far enough?
Look, we all are living through this moment, right? You're living through it as a reporter. I'm living through it as a member of Congress. Senators, whether you're Republican or Democrat, you are living through this. America is experiencing a moment of national anguish. And it is time that we do something that has teeth in it. Mark, the difference between the bill that we have and the Senate Republican bills is that this has teeth to it. It has enforcement to it. We don't need more studies about the impact of chokeholds. We don't need more studies about how no-knock warrants can go wrong. We are saying that we know that there are problems with this component of policing, and we want to have a law that says there will be no more chokeholds, there will be no more no-knock warrants, that there will be training of police officers in de-escalation, that there will be training of police officers in understanding the communities where we all live. And we think it's long past due to just study these issues and that we have to do something about it.
It remains to be seen how the debate in the Senate may still play out. Police accountability, one step that may address the most visual or the most visceral acts of injustice, those painful moments of anguish that you described that we've all seen play out on camera. But what about the more invisible injustices that have lingered behind the scenes but have been very real, very impactful for generations that have led up to this moment where we are now? Do you feel confident Democrats have done enough going into 2020 to address systemic racism in our society?
Frankly, I don't think any body of government has done enough. I don't, whether it's a city council, whether it's a state legislature, whether it's the U.S. Congress. I think there's much more that we have to do, but we have to have, you know, when we talk about debate, we do have to have this national debate, and it can be painful to talk about the systemic racism and where that has led our country. But this is a time for a time for a candid debate and conversation, and then action.
This is also an election year. I'd like to highlight and read to you one excerpt from a black voter in Michigan who spoke to Politico for an article titled, "Can Biden, Joe Biden, survive the despair of the black Democrat?" That's the article. The quote was, talking about how to win black voters over in this crucial election year, quote, "Don't bring some 27-year-old white kid from Oregon with skinny jeans and an iPad into my bleeping neighborhood in Detroit and tell me how to get out the vote." One other quote, from this time from a state representative in Michigan near Detroit, quote, "We're always the expletive help, and I'm tired of being the help. Don't wait until it's an election year, until you're in trouble to come ask for help saving yourselves. They always say it will be different after the next election, but it never is, and we're sick of it." And then another person chimes in, "And that's why Trump's going to win again," talking about that despair. When you hear that, how do you react?
I understand that, and I hear that, and there's much of what that person said that I agree with. You know, it's like you see a lot of politicians who going into an election, and it might be the September or it might be the October before the November election, and all of a sudden they go to a black church. What we've talked about in my campaign for as long as I've been in office is I don't want to be that politician. I always want to make sure that we are building relationships. We are listening. Again, I also like to look at it as God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use those proportionately, but listen to people. And I think the anguish that was coming out of that person's statement was that, Black voters have been the most reliable voters in Democratic politics for election cycle after election cycle after election cycle. I think what I hear that person saying is, don't take my vote for granted. Get to know me, fight for me when we have a fight on our hands, and we do right now, and make something happen.
After the election of President Trump, Politico, the same outlet, came to you and curious how a Democrat in your district that elected President Trump could win. They sort of pitched you as, I think, maybe a Trump voter whisperer. I don't know if you'd agree with that there, but you told them that, quote, on sensitive topics, things like Black Lives Matter, quote, I don't dwell on them. That was back then. Do you wish now that you had? Do you regret that comment at all?
No. I think, look, I'm a former reporter, and I know what you do to do research when you're interviewing somebody, and you could go back to, looking at articles that I used to write, from the 1980s for that matter. But the moment we're living in right now, it's 2020, and we are in the midst of a movement that is very special, and that is very important. And I think, historically we'll look back at this and we'll say, this was a moment of change. And I am confident that, again, as House Democrats, where we are in the majority, we will be voting on a momentous piece of legislation that will pass. And just whatever the Senate ends up doing, November is a time of change. And what I was going to say about the last person's statement, the part that I don't agree with is Joe Biden's going to win. And as House Democrats, we will stay in the majority and we will grow our majority. I'm increasingly confident that Democrats will win in the Senate as well. And then this meaningful change, and this isn't, I know there's all the articles about, we're going far left or we're whatever it is. We will bring about meaningful change that will pass the House, that will pass the Senate, that will be signed into law. I think this, what we are living through right now will lead to momentous change for the better of our country.
I want to ask you about one other rallying cry we've heard around this topic from your perch at the DCCC. You have a lot of House races. You mentioned you want to grow your majority in the House. Is the phrase defund the police helpful, harmful to your cause in those key districts?
Well, I'll turn to Karen Bass, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, close friend of mine who has been the lead author of the Justice and Policing Act. She has been very forceful in saying there's nothing in this bill that calls for defunding the police. And so that the word defund is not part of the bill that we will be voting on. And I think it's fair to take a look at budgeting and how a budget is used. A budget is a statement of the community's values. And to the point that I made earlier about when do you call a social worker? Do you call a social worker when somebody is standing on a bridge getting ready to jump off, as opposed to calling in a police officer, which is typically done? When you have problems at school, do you call in a police officer, or do you call in a social worker or a counselor? All of that is legitimate to ask those questions and figure out how we're spending the money. But again, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus has been very forceful in saying that this is not a debate about defunding police.
Certainly a lot of public interest, intrigue, and people watching closely to see what Congress can deliver before this November election. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, and we're back in just a moment with Congressman Rodney Davis.
Hey, Sheila, looking forward to spring?
Hell no, Sammy.
Cute. Me neither. Then it rains on our parade.
Good one, Sammy.
And don't forget the wind beneath our wings.
Whoops, there goes Joey. Bye, Joey.
We shingles have a tough life. Protect your home. Call Steinmeier Roofing and get a new roof as low as $99 a month.
That's right. Just $99 a month from Steinmeier Roofing.
Steinmeier Roofing.
We all know how crazy and difficult it's been lately, so now is a great time to don't worry, be happy.
There's nothing better to make you happy than a new Honda or Hyundai
financing and huge incentives are going on right now at Carback Car Capital's tent event in Danville. Don't worry, be happy.
More than 20,000 women receive a new diagnosis of ovarian cancer every year. Johnson & Johnson baby powder and shower to shower have been linked to ovarian cancer.
Johnson & Johnson has been aware of these risks for decades, but failed to warn women and the public.
In July, $4.69 billion was awarded to 22 women after they developed ovarian cancer after the use of talcum powder. Other victims have been awarded substantial compensation in previous verdicts.
If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with ovarian cancer and use talcum powder regularly, call Morelli Law Firm for a free consultation.
Morelli Law Firm has given a voice to people seriously injured for decades and has successfully litigated thousands of cases for its clients.
All talc cases are handled in-house by an experienced legal team that has the resources and resolve in drug and pharmaceutical litigation to ensure that you receive maximum compensation for your injuries. Call Morelli Law Firm for a free consultation.
Here's some great news. One stop for all car and truck repairs, plus a great tire selection. Tires Plus is tires plus routine auto maintenance, plus electrical work, plus brake service, plus air conditioning repairs, plus check engine light diagnosis, plus tire rotation. The Plus is in everything they do, and they'll match any locally advertised prices. There's so much plus, we ran out of time to tell you about the great selection of tires. Tires Plus and all Tires Plus Auto Care. They fix everything.
You're watching Capital Connection from the Illinois State Capitol.
After the death of George Floyd and the protests that rocked the nation following that moment, many Americans look to Congress to see how we might reform police accountability. Joining us now is Congressman Rodney Davis for his perspective on this issue. Congressman, good to have you with us. What's wrong with the Justice in Policing Act?
The Justice Act, I'm a co-sponsor.
Yeah, sorry, maybe you cut out there. There's the Justice Act, the Republican plan, and the Justice in Policing Act. What's wrong with that?
The Justice in Policing Act is the House version of the Democrat version of police reform.
Yeah, what's wrong with that plan?
There are many things that we agree on. As a matter of fact, probably 80% of that bill agrees with our Justice Act. There always are going to be disagreements between a Democrat and Republican bill on such an important issue. But the bottom line is, let's not let those disagreements stop us from seeing a bill pass in each chamber. And in the Senate's case, let's debate it even. And then we can work out our differences in a conference committee. So it's less about the problems I have with the bill, because I do have some concerns about techniques, and I do have some concerns about eliminating no-knock warrants, when many of those no-knock warrants can actually, they have to be proven in front of a judge to put the officers or people at risk before they can even be utilized or even offered. I have a problem with the extreme changes to qualified immunity. If qualified immunity is protecting every bad cop, then Derek Chauvin wouldn't be on trial for the murder of George Floyd, where he should be.
Well, qualified immunity protects police officers from individual damages if they commit civil or constitutional violations, different than prosecuting them. But it's interesting to hear you say, at a time like this, at a moment in our nation, we saw Vice President Pence earlier this week hesitate or decline to use the phrase Black Lives Matter. Should Republicans embrace that phrase? And do you have any hesitation using the phrase Black Lives Matter?
I have no hesitation talking about Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter. I have no hesitation at all. What I have a hesitation of is where groups will form and try and use hateful rhetoric to try and act like they're stopping other hateful rhetoric. And in the end, when we see what we're seeing in certain areas of the country, Washington, D.C. last night, for example, where a mob decided to try and take down a statue of Abraham Lincoln that was paid for by freed slaves, and that was during its initial unveiling, Frederick Douglass spoke at it. So we've got to do a better job in making sure that people understand that there are some bad parts of our nation's history. And we understand that we should never, ever let that happen again. But at the same time, if we don't learn what went wrong in American history, then some people may be bound to repeat it. And we need to make sure that people understand those who decide to threaten mob action against Abraham Lincoln statues or even Ulysses S. Grant. I mean, it's amazing to me that we don't have somebody out in front explaining to these young men and women who obviously don't understand the historical figures who helped eradicate our nation from that terrible scourge. We need to educate them on who these people are. And that, that is something that I hope we can take a step back in our educational systems throughout this country and begin to talk about the good things and the good people that really centered here in central Illinois with Abraham Lincoln, who wrote the Emancipation Proclamation, Ulysses S. Grant, who made sure that that proclamation was enforced. And also, those are the types of historical figures we should cherish, not destroy.
Let's pivot to the coronavirus and the government response real quick. On Sunday and again on Monday, earlier this week, President Trump twice said he wants to slow down testing. Even in places we saw in Texas where hotspots are cropping up, we saw federal funding stop. Federal funding that was going to help testing in hotspots that are right now struggling with their biggest surge of the coronavirus, and the funding is stopping. That's the federal government action intervening. It appears to match the president's words. Shouldn't President Trump and the federal government do everything in their power right now to expand and accelerate testing as far and as fast and as wide as they can?
Well, the facts don't match what the president said. Testing has expanded exponentially. It continues to expand exponentially. And frankly, a federal testing site was closed in Bloomington, Illinois, probably about a month ago now.
That wasn't a hotspot, though.
And the demand wasn't there. But at the same time, I'll make a comment when I see the facts about where those locations are, just like with Bloomington, Illinois.
All right, I'm told we're running out of time. Congressman Rodney Davis, thank you for joining us. We're back in just one moment.
Have you or a loved one been diagnosed with ovarian cancer after regular use of Johnson & Johnson baby powder? You may be entitled to compensation. A December 2018 Reuters news report states that from 1971 to the early 2000s, Johnson & Johnson was aware their raw talc and finished powders sometimes tested positive for small amounts of asbestos, but didn't disclose it to regulators or the public. Substantial verdicts have already been awarded because of Johnson & Johnson's failure to warn the public of this risk, including a $4.69 billion verdict in July of 2018 and 3 other verdicts totaling over $614 million. If you or a loved one has been diagnosed with ovarian cancer after regular use of Johnson & Johnson baby powder for feminine hygiene purposes, you may be entitled to compensation. How do you fight for the compensation you deserve? You choose the right legal team that has the experience, support staff, and resources to get the most compensation for your injuries. Call now.
Prospective clients on the way in why they chose us. I ask our current clients why do they stay with us, and it always circles back to one thing: lack of worry. They don't worry about things.
We have a pretty unique circumstance where we all have different skills, we all have different strengths, and ultimately I think it's that team effort where all of us come together to become bigger than the sum of our parts that really makes Rudy Wealth work as a family business.
That does it for us this week. Thank you for watching. We hope you'll join us again next Sunday for Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell.